Okay. Good morning, everyone. I haven't met some of you, especially Sunanda and Biswajit. So very quickly, my name is Rajnish Malhotra. Um, Currently working with S&P Global as an internal career coach. I have about 20 plus years of experience in various HR domains. Um, and I'm based out of Noida in Delhi NCR region. Um, Besides that, off late I've started running. So just thought I'll share this with all of you. In last 1 year or so, I picked up running. It's been very exciting for me. Um, so anyone who runs would know about this concept called a runner's high. I truly believe in that concept. It's a completely different kind of a feeling or an emotion altogether. So those who are not running, give it a go. And those who are running, I think will completely understand what I'm saying. Okay. Yeah, so I am doing this as part. Oh, Colonel is here. Okay. So I'm doing this webinar for this PCC course. Um, I find this whole process to be actually very interesting, wherein the cohort participants are required to, you know, give a presentation or give webinars on certain competencies. It's pretty good. So today, what I'm bringing for you is not a single competency, but a set of competencies, but from a people leader's perspective. So I'll share that with all of you. It's largely to do with it's a recurring theme within my organization wherein we want to invest a lot of time and energy in training people leaders to be a coach because we feel that it will help them in becoming more effective people leaders. And the good part is that this is not just our opinion that we have just decided one day that we'll do it. This comes very strongly from the business as well. So even the business leadership, based on their experience with everyone, um, like their experience with coaching, they also feel that if we introduce coaching as a leadership tool or as a management tool for our people leaders, then it will be extremely useful for them. Right. So with that, I will start sharing my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen here?
I can see Rajnish. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Colonel, welcome to the webinar. Happy Dashera to you.
Good morning. Happy Dashara.
Awesome. All right. So leading with the coaching mindset here, let's start with the agenda real quick. Uh, so why are we doing this? What is the need to do this? So I've given you my perspective as to why I became interested in this. But overall, also, in this session, we will try and explore how people leaders can embrace coaching as a critical part of their leadership toolkit. What we are trying to say here is that we don't expect people leaders to lead only through coaching. People leaders are required to play various roles. Sometimes they play the role of a consultant. Sometimes they play a role of a trainer. On certain occasions, they play a role of being a friend. They have to do that as well. So coaching is another tool in that toolkit that they can use depending on the situation to lead their teams more effectively. In my experience of creating this module, I did some research, reached out to a couple of people leaders as well, and spoke to them. And what came out from that discussion was that it is very important that a people leader has different tools available in their toolkit. And then based on the situation, they should know which particular tool to use. Like in certain situations, they would need to be a problem solver because they would need to give answers immediately. It is time sensitive, it is urgent. At that time, you can't be a coach. At that time, it is very difficult. So identify those coachable moments based on your daily interaction, based on what's coming up for you. But it is a very useful tool to have in the toolkit. Also, one thing that I want to call out is that when I use the term people leader here, I'm not just referring to senior leadership. I'm referring to new managers who have just become managers and are required to lead a team. I'm referring to mid-level managers as well. And then also managers of managers or some senior managers also. Um, this is something that they can embrace, use it in their day-to-day life, identify those coachable moments, and create that level of trust and rapport that is required to have harmony within the team. Um, so by adopting key coaching competencies like growth-oriented mindset, leaders can cultivate teams that are not only successful but also innovative and more engaged. When you spend time with your people, you invest time with people, and you talk to them about, and you try your best to evoke some sort of a transformation in them by asking them questions rather than giving them answers. You're basically making them think, you're making them reflect, you're making them think about their context. And that in that process, you're making them more independent. So there are multiple benefits of adopting this kind of a mindset, and we will also look at those benefits in the next slide. But sorry, but our agenda for today, context setting. Why is it important for people leaders to be a coach? How it can serve the people leaders? What are the benefits? Coaching mindset. How can people leaders develop a coaching mindset? What would they need in place to develop that kind of a mindset? Would it include showing up with a totally clean slate rather than having certain perceptions about their team? So we will talk more about that. And then listening to understand people leaders or people managers, whatever you may want to call it, in any field, are trained and groomed to listen to response. But here we are asking them, listen to understand, not to respond. Many times when we are in a conversation, maybe in a meeting or somewhere else, the other person hasn't even finished talking and we have already framed the response in our head. So we typically listen to respond. The idea here is listen to understand. Evoking awareness. How can people leaders evoke awareness within their teams? What would they need to do? What kind of strategy can they adopt? Basically, what kind of questions they can ask. So it is largely about asking and not telling. That's the strategy to evoke awareness. Okay, and then in the end, we are going to share a tool with them that they can use as a coaching process. Like it's important throughout the conversation is more centered around the concept of coaching and how does it benefit people leaders? How do the competencies benefit the people leaders? It's good to have all that understanding, but at the end of the day, you will be required to apply that understanding in a coaching conversation as well. So this grow model is perhaps the most basic model that is in place. And this model can help people leaders follow a kind of a process to engage in a coaching conversation with their team members. This is the agenda. Any questions before I move forward?
No question, Rajnish. Very relatable, very apt, and even your agenda, I think it's hitting the target. Even in my experience, when we work in various leadership development program, uh, I think the technical component, the process, the technology, they are easier to learn relatively, right? But what the feedback which we get, the new leaders struggle with the being leader part of it, and I think this address that part also Rajnish very well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're so right. And we get the same feedback that, new leaders are typically individual contributors who have done a great job. And because of that, they get promoted and they become people managers or people leaders. And then they are absolutely clueless because nobody trained them or groomed them to, manage people.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, moving on. All right. So, leading with the coaching mindset, I think you would appreciate that the role of a people leader has changed quite a lot. Earlier, the description of a people leader used to be, someone who is just giving orders. And the expectation from the team is that they should just totally, complete that order, work on that order, and that's it. Um, it lacked that personal connect. It lacked that, it lacked that investment in terms of growth and development of people. It was just all about giving instructions and nothing else. Well, obviously, things have changed quite a lot in past 30, 40 years, especially when it comes to people leadership. There have been several studies, several papers that have been published in this field. So many books have been written on it as well. So these days, it is not just about directing task or achieving a certain kind of a result. What is emerging now that it is even more important to empower your team members so that they reach their full potential. Now, what does that empowerment means? That empowerment could mean, giving them the freedom to choose what they want to learn, giving them the freedom to do do their tasks the way they think is the way they think is appropriate, rather than micromanaging every small aspect of their work. And coaching has emerged as a critical leadership skill, offering leaders the tools to unlock potential by helping employees think broadly and develop creative solutions. Fostering self reliance. This is really a big one. And I very briefly mentioned about it earlier. See, people managers or people leaders these days have a lot of work to do. They have so many things on their plate. And if you look at the day in a life of a people leader, you would notice that they spend majority of their time in solving problems of their team members or answering questions from their team members. That, I'm stuck here. How should I go about doing it? Or this person is not responding. Can you send an escalation on my behalf? Or can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? I'm stuck here. How should I go about doing this? Or I've made this presentation or made this Excel sheet. Can you take a look if it is right or not? They end up spending a lot of time in doing tactical and transactional stuff. And the reason why that happens is because the team is not independent. They're not self-reliant. Through coaching, there can be a significant shift from dependency to confidence in navigating challenges. Through coaching, you are leading people to personal discovery. You are enabling them to explore various subjects, various topics, and then choose the one that is best suited to their core strengths and values. So, coaching, even in my experience, when I do internal career coaching on a daily basis, I get a sense that my coaches are becoming more self reliant in terms of taking decisions, in terms of moving forward towards their goal, because they then get used to it. Okay, before I go to my boss, let me just ask a couple of questions in my head in terms of how should I move forward. It also helps in building stronger relationships. That's a big one. Through empathy, active listening, and meaningful dialogue. When you get into the depth of a conversation, and like we say in PCC, when you, as a coach, start to focus on the who of the conversation rather than the what, then that leads to some very personal kind of revelations. People open up to you because they think you have created a safe space for them, right? So that's how you end up developing stronger relationships. Through coaching, you can drive engagement in the team as well by aligning personal goals with organizational objectives. There are a lot of team members who have some goals that are more desirable in nature, which is fine. Sometimes they would want to have those kind of goals, and that's okay. But then the idea is that how you how can you use a coaching mindset to align those personal goals to the organizational objectives as well, so that there is this win-win kind of a solution. Uh, I feel that the benefits, there are other reasons also, other things that coaching can definitely support a team leader. But these were the four top reasons why I felt that we should share in terms of why is it important for people leaders to be a coach. Any comments here? Biswajit, Sunanda, anything?
Yeah,
Um,
no, sorry. Yeah, Sunanda, please go ahead.
no, go ahead, Mr. Deep.
Yeah, so I can understand where you are coming from. Just the case that I have been in that corporate role in the C-suite for almost 15 years. Uh, so what happens as where I can actually connect with you is that uh, the subject matter experts, when they're promoted as people managers, uh, they don't want to get into this people managing because that's not their domain. Okay,
Yeah,
so by so any problem that you present to them, they come to the technicalities of the problem rather than, so they try to solve the problem rather than solving the person. Okay, in coach, and my mentor
yeah,
said it very categorically: coach the person, not the problem.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
yeah, and that is how it all stimulates, and I'm completely with you on that. But when I try
yeah.
to get into that environment, that ecology in the organization, um, I didn't see too much of success in that, and that has made me a kind of anti-establishment kind of a person. Okay, because
Okay.
everybody is driven by results. So when you are
Mm,
talking to your uh, subordinates with the KPIs, how can you be not unbiased? Okay. So those were the confrontations, conflicts that
mm,
we were dealing in.
mm.
But yes, the right space to work is what you are trying to do with your organization. I agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing that, Biswajit. And this conflict that you're referring to, that conflict is very normal. And I've heard about this conflict in the past as well. And the reason I feel that conflict emerges is because at the end of the day, there is a certain goal that needs to be achieved in terms of, KPIs, targets, and all that. The only difference I see there at the end of the day is that with coaching, the expectation is not to compromise on the goals and the objectives, but to focus more on the transformation of the individual so that you can create the best version of that individual, and ultimately they will go on to achieve the results for you. But I hear you, totally hear you in terms of the conflicts that emerge as a result of adopting this kind of an approach. I get that. I get that. Sunanda?
I guess Biswajit has kind of articulated some of it, but I totally agree with what you said so far. And of course, when you started off by saying that coaching is one of the many
Yeah.
tools or modalities available to
Yeah.
people managers, and the thing that linking back to what Biswajit just said is that especially with subject matter experts moving into people
Yeah.
role is that relinquishing that control, that expertise, and moving away from telling
Mm,
mode to maybe asking mode and
mm,
helping their people solve for themselves. And this is something that I
exactly.
experience with people that I coach, is this transition is very, very difficult for them because they're coming from a space
Yeah.
where they understand what's
Yeah.
happening and what's going wrong, and to not just jump in
Yeah.
at get go and and give their suggestions is not something that comes very easily.
No, it doesn't. And it requires a shift in the mindset as well. I mean, you are so used to doing something in a certain way. And if now you are expected to do it in a different way, different way, you would be required to shift your mindset, and it does not come that easy. So
Right, absolutely.
I get that part. Okay, let's look at some of the
Rajnish, just
benefits
one
here.
thought.
Anji, yes, sir.
Just one
Please.
thought. Uh, so I think I was just wondering when you say leading with a coaching mindset, and so I feel that one of the biggest constraints that comes in leading with a coaching mindset is the organization culture.
Correct.
Because and it also depends on what I have undergone when I was growing up. So when I was growing up, if I have seen the advantage of being coached by somebody who's putting his time in developing a long-term potential, and so I think there are two things. One is organization culture, and that culture will actually drive leaders adopting a coaching mindset, because in the here and now, I want to solve that problem. I want to get that sales ticker going up. I'm not bothered if that guy is developing or not at that point of time. At that point of time, I want that extra, revenue coming in that month and target getting in. And therefore, like changing the hats is an important concept. But also to be able to develop, I think the organization must have a culture. And very often we tend to blame the middle management, junior leadership, that they don't know what to do. But we are ourselves not setting that kind, the leaders, at least when I say we, I think that's the wrong word to say. But the leaders at the top are not correctly setting that kind of, they're not demonstrating those kind of, qualities of developing team. And then lastly, it's about engagement. If the leader is engaged on short-term goals, then he will look at short-term goals. If the leader is engaged at long-term goals, only then he's going to go in for coaching. So just a few thoughts that came to my mind because,
No. Very, very important thoughts, Colonel. I totally agree with you here. You made a very, I mean, the point on culture resonates with me a lot, because when I look at the culture in my own organization, it is driven from the top very clearly. Like all the senior leadership in our organization, they are promoters and supporters of coaching. They will invite us to their town halls and they will praise us. They will acknowledge our contribution and they will encourage their team members to, go ahead and reach out to a career coach without any fear or without any insecurity. So you're so right. It needs to be driven from the top, and that's how. And driven from the top just does not mean talking about it. These top leaders are also they also reach out to coaches and they call it out. They say, "I'm getting coached by so and so person, and I'm getting benefited a lot." So they do it like that. So walk the talk kind of a concept, Colonel. But they do that.
Yep.
Sunanda, yes, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so add to what just Rajnish just said, totally agree that it has to be an organizational culture. Bringing my own experience in here, I work for an organization which actually introduced coaching way back in 2000, early 2000 or so. And my learning from that whole experience is that, there is a difference between using coaching as a tool and developing a coaching mindset. For a mindset, look, we all are coaches. We are all doing it in our everyday life, consciously or subconsciously, right? But to develop it as a mindset, it has to be a system-driven effort. Unless it is systemic, it will not thrive and it will not show you the results that coaching can bring in terms of transforming the way the organization works. And it has to be done, therefore, at every level. It's not sufficient that it's being done just at the leadership level. And the leaderships are, is seen to be walking the talk, unless it goes down right up to the bottom of where people are managed. And it will not be really a successful initiative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
so it has to percolate through the organization. It has to be lived in every moment of that organization in various ways. And it does not mean that, results do not matter. it is in the interest of those results that this is being done.
Exactly. I love that. It's in the interest of the results that we are asking people to adopt that kind of a culture. It is so true. Absolutely. I think that's a keyword for me here. Uh, okay, if I may. All right. So these are some of the benefits for a people leader to adopt this kind of a mindset. Okay. Increased autonomy. Team members become more self-sufficient and confident in their decision making. I mentioned that earlier as well. When you start asking and not telling, your team members will become used to that kind of a format of leadership. Because and even before and next time when they come to you, they will start asking themselves those questions. That okay, I'm going to my boss for this, but let me first do a quick reflection on my own to see, do I have any particular answers or what could be my possible next steps? So you would notice a certain change in approach, in attitude when it comes to doing their day-to-day work, and especially when it comes to doing a kind of work that requires a lot of thinking, complexities, and reflections. They will start becoming more independent there. Higher engagement, employees feel heard, valued, and invested in their own development. I remember a time, I've been in learning and development for nearly 20 plus years. Okay, I picked up career coaching just 2.5 years ago. But throughout my time in learning and development, one constant feedback that I would get all the time was that people leaders don't listen. They are like, यार मुझे पता है तू क्या बोल रहा है मुझे पता है I have that idea. So like I mentioned earlier, they would listen to respond. They would not listen to understand. Maybe because of the way they are trained, maybe because of the culture within the organization and so on and so forth. But that used to be a reality in one point in time. I think it still is. But when you start coaching your team and you are actively listening to them, they feel heard. They feel valued because of that. When you paraphrase and summarize what you're understanding from them, it cultivates that trust and safety with them, right? So that further leads to very higher engagement and building rapport and trust. Continuous improvement, every coaching conversation, especially when it comes to internal career coaching or an organizational coaching, I've noticed that most of those coaching conversations ultimately lead to some sort of improvement, continuous improvement, because at the end of the sessions, you do agree on certain actions or commitments that the coachee or the team member will take before the next session. So there is some continuous improvement happening. Also during the session, there are some personal discoveries, there are some reflections. So there are not just one or two, but several takeaways for a team member at the end of the coaching session that leads to continuous improvement. In terms of building trust, when a team member feels that they are being heard and my team leader or people leader has created a safe space for me, wherein I feel free to share my innermost concerns, fears, emotions, and sometimes even my victories, that leads to building a very solid trust and rapport within the team, because it leads to a very honest and a personal kind of a conversation. It leads to a much deeper connect within the team. Creativity and innovation, coaching encourages employees to think creatively, solve problems independently, driving innovation and fresh ideas within the team. All of us are coaches, and we very often ask our coaches that, okay, based on what we have discussed so far, what do you think could be some of your next steps? And I found that question to be the most revealing question, because at that time, the coachee starts to think that, okay, this is how the conversation has gone so far. And based on what I'm hearing, or based on what I've understood, here are some of the next steps that I could take. And this will take me closer towards my goal. Um, and it is also very individual specific. Like someone may want to think from a space of data and numbers. Some may want to think from a space of creativity and innovation. And some may want to think from a space of building relationships. So it completely depends on individuals. But what happens as a result of a coaching session, that it leads to this kind of an engagement and action. Collaborations, leaders who coach build trust and open communication, improving teamwork and fostering a more cohesive and collaborative environment. Any comments or questions on this one before we move ahead? All good? Okay. So now we've spoken about some context as to why should people leaders act as a coach or become a coach. We have also spoken about the benefits people leaders can get from adopting a coaching mindset. Now let's talk about how can people leaders become an effective coach by developing a coaching mindset. How can they listen deeply, some of the tips and tricks there, and how can they evoke awareness within their teams. Okay. All right. So a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to share my learning, and for the very first time, I shared my learning about the program, 10 learnings from the program. And I used a lot of metaphors for the very first time. And I was quite appreciated and praised for using those metaphors. So I have decided to repeat the same thing, use some metaphors again to pass on my message or pass on my understanding of this particular topic. So how can you develop a coaching mindset? There is a Chinese proverb which says, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Using a coaching mindset is like teaching your people to fish. Therefore, embrace a coaching mindset. And we have briefly spoken about this earlier as well. Like if your team member comes to you and has a question for you, your most obvious response will be to give an answer. Right? That's like giving a man a fish. But if your team member comes to you and he has a set of questions for you, either you can give a straight answer to that question, or you can try to ask powerful questions and get the answer from him, or at least an approach that could be followed to get that answer. That ways, your team member, next time when he's required to ask you something, will first think of those kind of questions and will first think of that kind of an approach before they come to you. So that ways, through coaching, you teach a man to, what do you typically do? That you teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Not just for one occasion, but for lifetime, because they become independent on their own. How can you develop a coaching mindset as a people leader? Talk regularly. I think, Sunanda, you mentioned earlier that it's very important to identify those moments. And it's very important in developing a coaching mindset that people leaders identify those coachable moments. There are a lot of organizations who have certain performance management philosophies. One philosophy that does not work is to have a one-on-one conversation at the end of the year. It just does not work. Because if throughout the year you haven't had any performance or development related conversation, and suddenly at the end of the year you say that, you know what, this is what you didn't do well, you could have done better here, you haven't given any opportunity to your team to work on those issues or work on those opportunity areas. So talk regularly. If you are in a meeting and you observe something, talk about it. Identify if it could be a coachable moment for you. Rather than giving feedback, can you coach your team member on that specific action or behavior? Please remember, coaching is best when it is ongoing. Sometimes even one call is good enough for a coachee to meet their agenda. But typically, if it is a performance or development related conversation, then it will go on for a longer duration. So it's best that it is an ongoing relationship. If as a team, if as a people leader, you identify those coachable moments and you continue to coach your team throughout the year, you will notice some very insightful trends and patterns about your team members that will help you to get the best out of them. It will give you some deep insights about their strengths and opportunity areas just by identifying those coachable moments and talking to them about it. Okay. Have a beginner's mindset. This is a tough one. This is very tough because as as a people leader, we are trained and groomed in a certain way. We've been trained to make decisions based on perceptions, based on what we have observed in the past. There is a certain method that we adopt as people leaders to make decisions or to form opinions about our team members. What we are saying here is that when you are in a coaching space, then it requires a shift in the mindset where you adopt a beginner's mindset, wherein you are releasing the need to evaluate or judge what's being said by your team member. So if your team member comes to you with a very specific kind of a topic, you would need to shift your mindset to ensure that you're receiving it as a beginner and not as someone who is their manager. Is that easy? Not at all. Was that easy for me when I started it? No. I struggled with it big time. But it does come with practice. That's for sure. And that's why it's very important to talk regularly. So you need to release the need to evaluate. The other one where I struggled probably more than adopting a mindset was control the urge to give answers. When as a people leader, you are coaching your team members, you already know the answer to what's being discussed, right? Sometimes it could be totally work related. It could be related to any particular task that is at hand. But especially if it is related to your team members' performance or development, especially development, then in that case, I would say you think you know the answers, but you don't. Your experience and your context is different to your team members' context. And that needs to be considered for sure. And if you start giving answers, then you are not being a coach. You have come back to being a manager who wants to, just exercise his authority at the end of the day that मुझे पता है मैं क्या बोल रहा हूँ, ये कर लो. That will not help. That will really not help. So controlling the urge to give answers is difficult thing to do, but again, it will come with practice. Another way to develop a coaching mindset is positive psychology, to be to focus on the positives. There's this concept in positive psychology called appreciative inquiry, wherein your process of inquiry is more focused on what's already working well for your coachee rather than what's not working well. It does not mean that you totally ignore the part that's not working well, but you base your conversation or you base your process of inquiry based on what's already working well for your coachee. So focus on what's working and be very authentic while giving feedback and acknowledgement. So if you notice that your coachee has done a good job throughout the coaching conversation in terms of expressing their feelings, in their observations, in coming up with some insights, then do give that feedback and be authentic about it. That will definitely help in developing a very strong coaching mindset. Any questions, comments on this one?
So, thanks. This is this. So, this is something that I can definitely relate to what you were saying. The way I had started this in my organization was like I was coached when I was promoted in the C-suite. I was coached, and I really liked that experience. Okay, and then I learned coaching from the David Rock School, which is a brain-based coaching. And then I came and met my team and gave them a full blown session on what I have learned and how interesting it is and how attached I am. Okay, so Sunanda said it. I mean, we all talked about like how it has to be steered from the top of the organization. Okay, but even if individuals takes that little step, okay, and can uh, uh, actually show that to the organization that yes, you can bring a change, okay, by doing this. So much so that I had around 500 people in my vertical, and I had around seven leaders who were leading them. They had around 15 team leaders. Okay, so I got this compliment one day. I was not in one of the functions that day, and I got this compliment from HR that if we met accidentally anywhere, and the way that person is talking, the way that we can relate it, okay, he must be from business team. Okay, that's he must be from business team because anyone who is in business team represent a a kind of etiquette in their conversation. Okay, so coaching is present in every conversation that you have, even if it is a 5 minutes conversation. Coaching is an element of that. That's what I was trying to get to, and of course, it then spread onto the larger part of the organizations. But I think what you are giving, the points that you are elaborating, is just the thing that we need to do in any organization. Thank you so much for bringing them in such a articulated way in presentation. Thank you so much. Like this is really helpful.
Pleasure, Biswajit. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, so this is an interesting picture that I picked up from the net. I do travel in metro from time to time, and I also sometimes go to certain public places where all the youngsters and people are just sitting and waiting for something. What you see these days, especially if you travel in metro, is that everyone is just watching their phones like this. No one is looking at each other. No one is even listening to each other properly. So I just thought before I talk about deep listening, I'll just put this picture in front of all of you. I think pretty much all of us can relate to this.
Yeah, and Rajnish, forget about talking to each other. We don't even talk to us also. We don't get time to reflect looking at the mobile. You know, that self-awareness, reflection time is all gone in the screen time. Yeah.
All gone in this. No, totally agree with you. Totally. So another metaphor in the spirit of dishing out good metaphors for all of you. Active listening is like being a sponge. Okay. Absorbing everything the speaker says, words, tone, and emotions. A leader, much like a sponge, takes in all the details without immediately responding or judging, allowing them to fully understand the message before offering thoughtful feedback or guidance. This is about listening deeply. Um, so you listen not just for what's being said, but it's much more than that. So it's about the whole person listening, like what Biswajit was saying earlier as well. This goes beyond what employees are just saying. It's about understanding their expression of feelings, their body language, what emotions are coming up for them. And it's not about just observing it, it's also about asking about it. So if you can notice that there is a energy shift happening in your team member in that coaching conversation, do ask about it. Hey, listen, I just noticed this energy shift in you when we were talking about this topic. What emotions are coming up for you? Oh, wow. What emotions are coming up for you as we talk about this particular topic? So listening is much, much more than just listening into the words. And the reason why listening needs to be done in that manner is because that's how you get to know the true context of what's being said. Just the words are not enough to understand that context or understand the soul of what's being said. Uh, Non-judgmental, very important in active listening. Every people leader who's getting into a coaching conversation, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be free from any judgment or perception. Because if you start judging what's being shared with you, then you are not in the space of a coach. Then you become either a manager or a mentor or even a consultant, right? Uh, as a leader who is in a coaching conversation, you got to be more curious rather than judgmental. So if my team member is saying this, what could be the reason behind that? Or what makes it so important and meaningful for this individual? What is the context? So more curiosity, and if not zero, but at least less judgment. I think that's very important. And then show your skills, show your listening skills. How would you ensure that you and your coachee are at the same level of understanding? So paraphrase, summarize, share your observation, share your intuitions, share what's coming up for you so that you ensure that you're at the same page with your team member in terms of what's being said. And your understanding is also very clear. Also, acknowledge the insights, talents, and expression of feelings of your team member based on what you have listened and what you have gathered. Um, Listen deeply is very, very important. One other thing that I always do before a coaching session is that I have this sticky note right at the top, which says what and how you respond is sourced from how you listen. So your response to the coachee, your process of inquiry for the coachee will completely depend on how you are listening. If you are not tuned in, your process of inquiry may go into a different tangent altogether, and that may lead to total waste of time for everyone, and it may not end up being a effective session. Right? Any points on this one? Questions, comments? Active listening, deep listening?
Yeah, so, not question or comment, but I thought I'll just. So, when I got into this workshop with Franklin Covey on their coaching base, when they came to this active listening part, what they did is it was done after lunch. Okay, what they did is they switched off the AC of the room. It was a it was a room. It's not a hall. It could accommodate only 10 people. Okay, 4 tables, 10 people who were learning. They switched off the AC totally, and we all were suffocated. Okay, because no happened. Okay, and after that, he came uh, listening. Okay, and then suddenly the AC started off again, and we all felt as if, oh, so better. That's when he said, like, that's exactly when you feel when you are listened properly, and it was intentional. So there was so when you
Yeah,
listen to
Vishwajit,
somebody,
yeah. No, I'm just saying I know Franklin Covey
when
people. They try to do all
you
this
listen to
theatrics. They could have
somebody,
adopted some
was
other method.
and that's the thing on there. This is, I was just trying to emphasize what the importance of read it better.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. In the interest of time, I'll quickly complete the slides first, and then maybe we could get into some more discussions. Evoking awareness. So evoking awareness is, again, in the spirit of metaphors, evoking awareness is like holding up a mirror for the team member. Instead of giving answers, the leader reflects back the employees' thoughts and feelings, allowing them to see themselves more clearly and uncover insights they had not realized were within them. This is all about personal discovery. Following a process of inquiry, asking a certain type of a question, doing a very particular type of an activity to create personal discovery for your coachee. So as far as process of inquiry is concerned, when it comes to people leaders, most of us are expected to have answers. It's about the quality of questions we ask. So rather than giving answers, focus on the quality of questions that you would ask that would elicit a response from your team member. And the response will be such that they will be required to think about it. They will be required to reflect on it. Like many a times when you are coaching, when you are in a coaching conversation, you would notice that your coachees are thinking hard. And they would also say that, you know what, I never thought about this. Or when you would test their assumptions, when you would challenge them on certain occasions, you would notice that they would say that, you know what, yeah, now it seems that all these thoughts and fears were just in my head. There is no evidence to suggest that they are actually true. That is one of the highest form of awareness that you can get. Or when you start focusing on the person, when you ask questions like, you know, who would you want to show up as in that particular situation? Or what happens to you when you feel uncertain about something? These are some very deep questions where you are asking your coachee to get into the depth of who you are. Like, what happens to me when I'm uncertain? What does that mean? It basically means, how do I typically respond and react in that particular situation? How do I show up as a human or as an individual at that time? These kind of inquiries or questions, they evoke a lot of awareness, and it leads to some very solid revelations. Uh, like we mentioned, don't tell. So what kind of inquiry needs to be mostly open-ended? You know, what, when, how, who, where you create a thought-provoking space for your coachee. And also questions that move forward. Sometimes as coaches, in the spirit of being very curious, we end up asking certain questions that are good for us, but it may not help the coachee in moving forward towards their goal. Same mindset would need to be adopted by a people leader as well who is in a coaching conversation. It's not about getting more information for themselves. It's about getting appropriate and relevant information about your team members' goals and objectives. So need to be aware of that as well. Also refrain from telling, like we mentioned earlier. Feel free to challenge, test assumptions, but also respect the client's multitude of systems. Now, what does multitude of systems mean? Every individual has their own context, and they come from different set of systems, which includes their culture, their value, traditions, unique talents, gifts, strengths, weaknesses, so on and so forth. When the relationship is ongoing, try and understand your client's multitude of systems as well. Even as a people leader, that will give you some very in-depth insights about where your team member is coming from, what makes them respond in a certain way, what makes them insecure in certain situations, and things like that. Okay. One last slide, and then we will get into the conversation. I'm skipping this one. Like I mentioned earlier, that we have discussed how these competencies can be adopted or developed by a people leader. I'm sharing a very simple process that people leaders can follow to have a coaching conversation. This is one of the oldest models in coaching. It's called the GROW model, where G stands for goals. So it's all about understanding what are the goals of that specific conversation. You could look at it as contracting. Then the second part is to understand what is the current reality in in alignment with that goals that you have identified. What is the current situation? Invite some sort of self-assessment and gather data from various sources, especially what kind of feedback are they getting from other stakeholders and things like that. So get a sense of the reality if you can. Then once you have discussed the reality part of the pie, then look at what are the available options in terms of taking the next steps. What could you do, right? What is your typical process of exploring those options? Like, how do you go about it? Do you take a pen and paper and write the pros and cons for each option and then decide which is the better one? Whatever may be the method, I think it's very important that you identify those options and then you find a way to explore those options. It's important that at this stage, some sort of choices are made. And then ultimately, what's next? What's next is all about execution, committing to certain actions, and also identify what could be the possible obstacles or barriers in the way to completing those actions. Right? So this is a very simple process that every people leader can follow in having a coaching conversation with their team member. Right? Uh, we are at the hour, but I'm still open to any questions that you may have. Questions, comments, feedback about the session.
So really very nicely and concisely capture the why, what, and how of a coaching mindset for a leader. So
Yeah.
great. Uh, just one thing coming to my mind, I think uh, with with Gen AI and so many things coming in, I think answers today. I mean, employee or a team member does not need to go for a leader for just getting the answer. There's so many ways to get the answers, right? And I think
Correct.
that's where
Correct.
coaching can actually help a leader up his or her game with these skills. Which is something like Gen AI cannot provide to a member.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair point. Fair point.
No, Rajesh, thank you. Excellent, great compilation of how leaders can also act as coaches. But I think the last point that the thought that is staying with me is that I was thinking, what benefits can it bring? What can it do? And imagine working in organizations, forget that you are in HR, forget that you are a people coach. For all of us to just imagine, when in our life did we feel most valued? In professional life or even in personal life? It was always to me, it was always in presence of a person where I felt that he's invested in my goodness, in my development. So when I'm interacting in a group or with a person who I know is genuinely invested in my development, and through my development, he may be developing his team, he may be developing, achieving all those goals. He may have other goals also which are there. And that really, I think, sets the tone. And if leaders can understand that coaching is not, otherwise a very soft kind of a thing. यार मैं ये coaching नहीं करता यार, काम करना है, bloody buggers have to work. These people are so soft. All those thoughts come into our mind. Oh, these bloody jokers today, yaar, Gen Next or whatever is the thing. They don't have that patience to work. But if we understand that if that kind of a relation is built, then mountains will move. Huh? Then you can do anything.
Yeah.
And when I look back, there are few people only with whom I always felt I always wanted to be in their presence and bask in their glory, tell them something about myself, even tell what has not gone right or not gone wrong, because I would get a feedback which I would take back and I would feel good about it when I go back. So I just wanted to share that.
Very, very, very relevant to our discussion as well. Feeling valued when someone is invested in you, feeling valued when someone acknowledges and recognizes your efforts, what you are bringing to the table, gets the best out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colonel, for sharing that. Appreciate it. Any other thoughts?
Rajnish, Victor here.
There we
So,
go.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Look. So, Rajnish, I just heard you saying that when we keep listening we can ask questions and even share our insights to the coachee, right? So I was just getting into that conversation that when we share our insights, does will it not occur as a solution to them or
Mm.
our agenda to them? Is it okay to share our insights or just hint upon
Yeah.
it and say instead of, I mean, say maybe like this or maybe like that. Even if you say maybe it's
Yeah.
not going to work or maybe it's going to
Yeah.
work, even
Yeah.
that's a suggestion, right? So that's an insight,
Yeah.
but it can land as a
Victor,
suggestion.
yeah. So Victor, it's all about the way that message is delivered. So if I say, for example, suppose we are in a coaching conversation, Victor, and I'm your coach,
Mhm.
and I say, Victor, based on our discussion so far, what's coming up for me is that you're feeling very uncertain about this specific situation. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong or keep me honest here. But what do you think about this uncertainty that is coming up for you? So
Mhm.
what I'm saying that, you know what, Victor, I'm observing something based on what's being shared, and I'm asking you, what do you think about it? I'm not passing this out as something that it's true. I'm
Mhm.
saying this is coming up for me. Tell me, what do you think about it? And multiple times the coachee will say, no, no, I'm not thinking like that. Perfect, no problem. You mentioned it because you felt that it was coming up for you based on your intuition or based on how you were listening into the conversation. So it's all about how you're delivering it, Victor. I hope it answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
In fact, Rajnish just wanting to develop that further. So
Yes, sir.
it's more like developing an hypothesis and
Mm,
keep proving it. So
mm,
you come out with what is coming for you from a very open space and say, I'm sensing, like you said. And then you keep improving the hypothesis because you're never
yeah,
going to arrive at the complete truth. The complete truth, I don't think that in any
exactly.
conversation we can come get out to. You don't know what complete truth is, but you
Yeah,
keep iterating. So unless you bring out what you are experiencing or what you are feeling, and that bring out from a
yeah,
space where it's perfectly okay. The coachee or the person may say that no, it's absolutely ridiculous what you're thinking, and you should be prepared to just move
yeah,
on from there.
yeah,
Don't hold on to
yeah.
it. So, like for
Hope.
example, when I was doing this competency 8 session
Mm,
beginning of this week, so I said so many
mm,
times in a coaching conversation towards the end, when I am coaching a coach, when I'm coaching a coachee, I feel that, oh, this was a great revelation for him. I have broken all the barriers, and now this coachee is going to do very well. And then when I ask him, what's your biggest takeaway of this? And he comes up with something which is totally 180 degrees opposite what I was thinking. And then
yeah.
I, at that point, I was, अरे यार इसको तो समझ ही नहीं आया सारा सेशन. But that is what he's
Yeah,
understanding.
yeah. Precisely. And then, Colonel, to your point
Yeah.
that, that it needs to be taken forward, you're so right. So when you say that, what's coming up for me is that you're feeling uncertain about the situation. And if you say that, yes, Rajnish, you're right, I'm feeling uncertain, then you just don't stop there. Then you take it forward.
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
so tell me what happens to you when you feel uncertain, or who are you when you are uncertain in a given situation.
absolutely.
So completely agree with what you said.
That's a very
Absolutely.
great question, in the sense that this is a very important point. So, and there is a difference. You may offer this in a manner which may be totally leading, and that could just, so that's why, like when Victor asked, I think that's a very
Exactly.
point. You could
Exactly.
actually just change the whole tone by
Yeah.
saying that I think it is like this, and let's do it like this. So now the whole
Exactly.
thing is gone.
It's just the way it is delivered. It's all in the language. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for
Okay.
coming for this session. Appreciate that. I am going to stop the recording. Recording is